The room laughed with him, soft at first, then louder, safer, rehearsed. 15 years compressed into a punchline. She didn't argue, didn't blink, just closed her notebook with a quiet precision that somehow cut deeper than any response. Because she had already done the math, and it wasn't about 10%. It was about what the company thought she was worth, versus what she had quietly built behind the scenes. Outside, the corridor felt colder, sharper. Her phone lit up once, then again. Systems she had designed, optimized, and more importantly, understood better than anyone else were about to do something no one in that room anticipated. Not dramatic, not loud, just irreversible. 7 minutes is nothing, unless every second carries 15 years of knowledge. And somewhere between the elevator doors closing and the CFO opening that report, a very expensive realization began to unfold. By the time the laughter dissolved into polite silence, the meeting had already moved on. Slides advancing, voices smoothing over the moment like nothing had happened. But something had shifted. Not visibly. Not yet. Just a subtle misalignment in the rhythm of the room, like a clock ticking a fraction too fast. She stepped into the hallway without looking back. 15 years. Not in titles, not in plaques. Not in those carefully worded performance reviews that HR love to archive. 15 years in patterns, in invisible optimizations, in knowing exactly which process would break first if pressure was applied in the wrong place. She didn't build the system from scratch, but she rewired it so quietly that no one noticed where the original blueprint ended and her logic began. That was the real problem. When work becomes seamless, people assume it's simple. When outcomes arrive without friction, they assume they're inevitable. And when someone like her stops explaining what she does, because explaining takes time, and she was always busy making things actually work, the illusion becomes complete. She reached the elevator and pressed the button once. Calm, measured, no hesitation. Inside the conference room, the CEO was already on to the next topic: automation projections. Irony has a very precise sense of timing. A few slides later, someone mentioned efficiency gains. Someone else referenced cost reduction curves. Numbers floated. Clean, abstract, safe. No one said her name. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. She stepped in and, for the first time since the meeting began, allowed herself a small exhale. Not relief, not frustration, something sharper. Resolution. Her phone buzzed again. Not messages, not calls. Triggers. Quiet confirmations from systems that were never supposed to need her attention, but always had it. Scripts adjusting parameters, dependencies rerouting, safeguards switching modes. Nothing dramatic. No alarms, just subtle shifts in behavior that, taken individually, meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns, when misunderstood, become risks. On the 4th floor, someone in operations frowned at a dashboard that suddenly looked different. Not broken, just unfamiliar. A slight delay where there used to be none. A small deviation in output timing. The kind of thing you ignore at first, because everything still works, until it doesn't. Back upstairs, the CFO hadn't spoken in a while. He was watching the screen, fingers resting lightly on the table, as if waiting for something to confirm a suspicion he couldn't yet articulate. Automation was supposed to simplify things, but only if you understood what you were automating. The elevator reached the ground floor. She stepped out into the lobby, sunlight cutting through the glass facade in clean, geometric lines. For a moment, everything felt almost cinematic. Too precise, too quiet, like the pause before a system recalibrates. Her phone buzzed one more time. This one she looked at. A single line. Execution confirmed. She slipped the phone back into her bag and walked toward the exit, her pace unchanged, her expression unreadable. Behind her, in a building full of confident decisions and polished assumptions, something had just begun to unfold. Slowly, quietly, and with a precision no one had budgeted for. Because the real cost of underestimating someone isn't immediate. It compounds. And somewhere between a dismissed 10% and a $40 million automation model, the company was about to learn exactly how expensive simple can become. At first, it looked like a rounding error, a fractional delay in one pipeline, a minor variance in output timing, numbers still within tolerance, technically acceptable, statistically ignorable. The kind of deviation that disappears in quarterly averages and never makes it into executive summaries. But patterns don't care about tolerance. On the operations floor, screens began to feel unfamiliar. Not wrong, just slightly out of sync with expectation. A process that usually resolved in seconds now took a few more. A dependency that once aligned perfectly started drifting by milliseconds. Tiny misalignments, each too small to escalate. Together, they started to whisper. Is this normal? No one answered immediately, because everything still worked. That was the elegance of it. No alarms, no failures, no obvious trigger to pull. Just a slow erosion of certainty. The quiet kind that forces people to double-check, to hesitate, to open dashboards they haven't touched in months. Time stretched, decisions slowed, confidence diluted. Upstairs, the CFO finally leaned forward. Pause on that slide. The room complied. The automation projection, clean, optimistic, confident, froze mid-sentence on the screen. 40 million in projected impact. Efficiency curves trending exactly where investors liked them, but something didn't line up. Run the live feed, he said. A technician hesitated for half a second, then switched the input. Numbers updated. Not dramatically. Not enough to alarm anyone who wasn't looking for it. But the CFO wasn't watching the totals. He was watching the behavior. The way data moved. The way systems responded. The subtle lag between cause and effect. He'd seen this before. Not the exact pattern, but the category of it. The kind that doesn't break systems. The kind that reveals how fragile they are. Who owns this layer? He asked. Silence. A glance between managers. A quiet shuffle of responsibility that didn't land anywhere specific, because ownership had been distributed, documented, standardized, but not understood. Downstairs, in a glass-walled office, someone reopened a configuration panel they hadn't touched in over a year. The settings were familiar. Almost. Names they recognized. Parameters they had approved. Except now, the relationships between them felt deeper. Like looking at a map and realizing the terrain had contours you never noticed. Why is this adjusting on its own? It's not, someone replied. It's just responding. To what? No one answered, because the answer wasn't in the system. It had left the building. The CFO stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the gravity of the room. Conversations paused. The CEO glanced over, still composed, still confident, but now paying attention in a different way. What are we missing? The CFO asked quietly. That question landed heavier than any alarm, because it implied something simple. They weren't in control. Another update came through. A minor throughput drop in a segment that had never dropped before. Still operational. Still within acceptable range. But now the pattern was undeniable. Small deviations aligning into something coherent. Something intentional. Pull the dependency map, the CFO said. It appeared on the screen. A web of processes, integrations, and automated decisions layered over 15 years of incremental improvements. Clean on the surface, complex underneath. Too complex. Who mapped this? No one spoke. Because the map existed, but the understanding didn't. And somewhere in that silence, the memory of a calm figure standing up, closing a notebook, and walking out began to surface. Not as an emotional moment, but as a data point. A missing variable. The CFO exhaled slowly. Finder. No urgency in his tone. No panic. Just clarity. Because by the time systems start whispering, the cost isn't in what's broken. It's in what you can't see. Across the city, she walked without checking her phone again. She didn't need to. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do: operate. Just not the way they assumed. And back in that room of polished projections and confident laughter, a new understanding settled in, quiet and precise. Automation doesn't remove dependency. It hides it. If you've ever watched someone underestimate years of quiet expertise, only to realize it too late, this story will hit differently. Subscribe and stay with this case. Because what happens next isn't about revenge. It's about leverage, about contracts, control, and the exact moment a company understands what it actually lost. And trust me, when the legal team starts asking questions, everything changes. They didn't call it a crisis. Not yet. Officially, everything remained within acceptable variance. Systems were operational. Clients weren't complaining. Reports still generated on time. Almost on time. The language stayed controlled, deliberate, engineered to prevent escalation. But the tone had changed. You could hear it in the pauses. The CFO didn't sit back down. He moved closer to the screen, not as a reaction, but as a recalibration. The dependency map expanded, layers unfolding like a blueprint that had always been there, just never fully examined. Connections revealed themselves not as lines, but as decisions, thousands of them, stacked over years. Zoom into that segment, he said. A cluster lit up, small, peripheral, easy to ignore, until now. That feeds the automation model, someone explained. Indirectly, another added, as if that made it safer. Nothing is indirect when timing is involved. Another update flickered across the dashboard. Latency increase, marginal, error rate, stable. Throughput, slightly degraded. Still clean, still defensible. But now, consistent. Patterns don't need to be loud to be dangerous. They just need to be precise. Roll back the last configuration, a manager suggested, already half-typing. Stop, the CFO said quietly. The room froze. Rolling back assumes we know what changed. A silence followed. Not uncomfortable, but revealing. Because no one could point to a single change. No deployment, no update, no incident log. Just behavior. And behavior doesn't roll back. Across the floor, teams began opening documents they hadn't touched in years. Internal wikis, legacy notes, fragments of logic written during late nights and long sprints. Half documentation, half memory. They were looking for something specific. They just didn't know what. In a side room, legal joined the call. No announcement, no introduction. Just a new voice, precise and measured. Is there any contractual dependency tied to system continuity? The question landed differently than the others, because it wasn't technical. It was structural. Someone pulled up the agreements. Service level clauses, maintenance obligations, performance thresholds, pages of language designed to protect the company, from outages, from failures, from disruption, but not from absence. Everything is within SLA, a manager said carefully. For now, legal replied. The distinction mattered, because SLAs measure outcomes, not understanding. Back in the main room, the CEO leaned forward for the first time since the meeting began, not reacting to numbers, but to the shift in posture around him. The CFO wasn't speculating anymore. He was narrowing. Show me the origin layer, he said. A deeper view loaded. Older code. Foundational processes. The parts of the system no one touched because they simply worked. Until now. Who designed this architecture? The CEO asked. Another pause. Not because they didn't know, because saying it out loud would connect the dots. And once connected, they couldn't be ignored. Downstairs, a senior engineer stared at a block of logic and felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Not about what it did, but about why it was written that way. There were decisions embedded in it that weren't documented. Adjustments that only made sense if you knew the context they were built in. Context that wasn't in the code. Context that had walked out. She didn't just optimize this. He said quietly to no one in particular. She balanced it. That word lingered. Balanced. Not automated, not simplified. Balanced. And balance, once disrupted, doesn't collapse immediately. It drifts. Back upstairs, another metric updated. A second segment now showing the same pattern. Independent systems. Same behavior. That was enough. The CFO straightened. "This isn't noise," he said. "It's alignment." No panic. No raised voice. Just a conclusion. The CEO nodded once. Slowly. Precisely. The confidence was still there, but it had changed shape. Less certainty. More calculation. "Status?" he asked. A manager hesitated. "We're stable," he said. The CFO didn't look away from the screen. "We're exposed," he corrected. 2 words, and the room understood the difference. Because stability describes the present. Exposure defines the risk. Another quiet update. Another fractional shift. And with each one, the same realization sharpened. Nothing was breaking, but everything was becoming harder to predict. Across the city, she paused at a crosswalk, the light reflecting off glass buildings in clean, controlled lines. The world outside remained perfectly ordinary. Cars passing, people moving, conversations blending into the background. Inside the company, time felt different. Compressed. Measured not in minutes, but in decisions delayed, assumptions questioned, control slowly slipping through systems that still appeared to function. Her phone remained silent now. It didn't need to speak anymore. The system had found its new equilibrium, just not theirs. Back in the room, legal spoke again. If performance degrades below threshold, obligations trigger. No one asked which obligations. They all knew. The CFO finally stepped back. "Prepare options," he said. Not instructions, not solutions. Options. Because the path forward was no longer obvious. And in a company built on projection, optimization, and control, that uncertainty was the most expensive variable of all. They started with the obvious move. Access. Lock down critical layers, restrict permissions, route all changes through central control. Someone proposed, already drafting the protocol. It sounded decisive, structured, familiar. The CFO didn't object. He just asked one question. Control over what, exactly? Silence. Because access assumes ownership. Ownership assumes understanding. And understanding was precisely what they were missing. Still, the order went through. Permissions tightened. Dashboards centralized. Alerts recalibrated. A clean, technical response to a problem that refused to behave technically. The system didn't resist. It complied. Quietly, efficiently, almost elegantly. And then, nothing changed. Not worse. Not better. Just the same subtle drift. That was the moment it became uncomfortable. Because when intervention produces no effect, you're not managing the system anymore. You're observing it. In operations, someone attempted a manual override on a segment that had begun to lag. The command executed flawlessly. The outcome didn't. A delay, small, measurable, unexplained. "It went through," he said, frowning at the screen. "I know," his colleague replied. "That's the problem." Upstairs, legal had moved from questions to framing. If continuity depends on undocumented logic, they said, we're not dealing with a technical gap. We're dealing with a dependency risk. The words were precise, clinical, expensive. The CEO stood by the window now, hands in his pockets, looking out at a city that functioned with the kind of predictability he expected from his own company. Traffic flowed, signals synchronized, outcomes aligned with intent. Inside, alignment was slipping. "How long?" he asked. No one rushed to answer, because timelines require models, And models require assumptions. The CFO didn't turn from the screen. Not immediate, he said, but accelerating. That was worse. Immediate problems trigger action. Gradual ones. Test discipline. Another update. A third segment now echoing the same behavior. Independent, isolated, and yet aligned. Someone tried to isolate the pattern. They couldn't. Because it wasn't located in one place. It was distributed, embedded in decisions made over years, layered into logic that wasn't written to be understood at a glance, but to function flawlessly under pressure. Which it still did. Just not for them. Downstairs, the senior engineer reopened the same block of code, this time slower. Not scanning, reading, as if the intention might reveal itself if given enough attention. There it was again. That structure, not optimized for speed, not optimized for simplicity, optimized for balance. He leaned back, a realization forming with uncomfortable clarity. This wasn't built to be controlled, he said quietly. It was built to be trusted. The distinction mattered, because trust scales differently than control. And trust, once removed, doesn't degrade cleanly. It fragments. Back upstairs, the CFO finally stepped away from the main display and walked to the side table where printed reports, yes, printed, had been laid out. Old habit, different perspective. He flipped through them quickly, not reading line by line, looking for inconsistencies. There, a note in the margin, months old, maybe longer. A small adjustment to an automation threshold, justified, approved, logged. But the reasoning behind it wasn't in the system. It never had been. He closed the report. "Get me her documentation," he said. A manager nodded. "Already pulling everything." "That's not what I asked." A pause. Because documentation is what's written. Understanding is what's lived. Across the city, she sat now. Somewhere quiet, somewhere unremarkable. The kind of place no one would associate with a $40 million impact model. Her posture relaxed. No urgency. No visible tension. Because from her perspective, nothing unusual was happening. The system was doing exactly what it had always done. Adapting. Back in the building, the fourth segment flickered. Not failing. Not yet. Just joining the pattern. That was enough. The CFO returned to the center of the room. "We need to recalibrate our assumption," he said. The CEO turned slightly. "Which one?" "That automation replaced dependency." A beat. Then more precise? It didn't. It concentrated it. The room absorbed that, because it reframed everything. This wasn't about a missing employee. It was about a single point of understanding, distributed across systems, invisible until it wasn't. Legal spoke again. "If we're dependent on non-transferable expertise, recovery isn't a technical process." No one asked what it was. They all understood. Negotiation. The CEO exhaled slowly, the kind of controlled breath that signals a shift. Not in emotion, but in strategy. "Prepare an outreach," he said. "No theatrics, no admission. Just alignment with reality." "How do we position it?" someone asked. That question carried weight. Because positioning defines leverage. The CFO answered without hesitation. Accurately. No spin, no framing. Because the system had already removed their margin for illusion. Across the city, her phone remained still. No calls yet. No messages. Just silence. But this silence felt different. Not empty. Anticipatory. Back in the room, one final update came through. Small, precise, consistent with everything that had come before. The pattern was complete. Not catastrophic. Not dramatic. Just undeniable. And in that quiet convergence of small, controlled deviations, the company reached a conclusion it could no longer postpone. They hadn't lost control all at once. They had been operating without it for longer than they realized. They didn't rush the call. That would have been the old instinct. React, escalate, restore control through speed. But speed requires clarity. And clarity was still assembling itself, piece by piece, across screens and conversations that no longer pretended everything was understood. So they waited. Not passively. Strategically. Legal drafted language. Careful. Neutral. No admissions. No assumptions. Just enough precision to open a conversation without defining its outcome. The kind of message that doesn't ask for help, but makes it obvious that help is required. The CEO reviewed it once. Then again. Too formal, he said. It sounds like we're still in control. They adjusted. Less structure, more signal. Because positioning isn't about what you say. It's about what the other side hears. The CFO didn't look at the draft. He was watching the system. Not for failure, for behavior. Because behavior, once understood, becomes leverage. On both sides. Another update came through. No escalation. No collapse. Just continuity. At a cost that was now measurable. Time. Extra seconds per process. Small delays compounding across workflows. Decision cycles stretching just enough to be felt, not enough to be flagged externally. Yet. He ran a quick projection. Not the polished model from the presentation. A raw one. Unfiltered. If the pattern held, the $40 million impact wouldn't disappear. It would invert. Quietly. Elegantly. Expensively. He closed the file. Send it, the CEO said. The message left the building without ceremony. No escalation chain. No CC list. Just a direct line between 2 points that, until an hour ago, were never expected to reconnect under these conditions. Across the city, her phone vibrated. Once. She didn't reach for it immediately. Timing matters, especially when the other side has just realized it no longer controls it. She let it ring out. Silence returned. Then a second vibration. She glanced at the screen. No surprise. No reaction. Just confirmation. Back in the building, minutes stretched. Not long enough to be called waiting. Long enough to feel it. Someone refreshed a dashboard that hadn't changed. Someone else reread the same line of a report. The CEO stood still now, no longer by the window, no longer moving. Just present, focused on a variable that was finally outside the company's internal systems. Response. The CFO spoke without looking up. She won't answer immediately. How do you know? The CEO asked. A slight pause. Because she never did anything immediately. Not delay. Precision. There's a difference. Another minute passed. Then, a vibration. Not on her phone. On theirs. A reply. Short. Structured. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who understood both systems and people. I'm available to discuss transition terms. No emotion. No context. Just a frame. Legal leaned forward. Transition terms, they repeated. Not return. Not support. Transition. The word did the work, because it implied something critical. She wasn't coming back to restore the past. She was defining the future. The CEO read the message once. Then again. A faint shift in expression. Not frustration, not relief. Recognition. This is her system now, he said quietly. The CFO didn't correct him. Because control had already shifted. Not in a dramatic takeover. Not in a visible collapse. But in a series of small, precise decisions that aligned over time, until one side understood exactly how things worked, and the other realized it didn't. Set the call, the CEO said. No delay. Because in negotiations, timing isn't about speed. It's about position. Across the city, she locked her phone and looked out at a world that hadn't changed at all. Traffic still moved. Light still reflected. Systems still operated. Just with a different center of gravity. And somewhere between a dismissed 10% and a quiet message about transition terms, the company finally understood something no report had captured. Value isn't what you offer, it's what you can't replace. Silence.